Hello, a very warm good afternoon to all of you. I'm Sakshi, welcoming you all on behalf of Net Zero Alliance and First View Group to Net Zero Energy Roadmap Data Centers. This event is powered by Solar Quarter, Wind Insider, and Energy Storage Pro. I take the pleasure to thank our panel members for extending their immense support to organize this event. And a very special mention to our sponsor, Tata Power Solar, for being our crusader here. Here, I would like to make a small announcement. Attendees can post their questions in the Q&A box and our speakers will take up those questions at the end of the panel discussion. I would now request my team to play the commercial video. Thank you, team, for playing that video. May I now introduce to the audience Mr. Vikrant Musil, who will also be sharing his company's presentation with us. Over to you, Mr. Vikrant.
Thank you so much, Sakshi. Thank you so much for this introduction and playing the video. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vikrant. I take care of business development for Tata Power's renewable energy arm. Uh, uh, with regarding this today's contest, where we are targeting, to be a net zero, and we are planning to develop the map for the country. I have a small presentation where I just wanted to bring everyone's notice that how Tata Power as an organization can contribute in the journey. So I'll just share the presentation. Do let me know once my screen is visible. Is it visible?
Not yet, sir.
So just to talk few minutes about the group. As we all are aware that the group was incorporated by Mr. J.R.D. Tata, Mr. Jamshedji Tata back in 1868. Amongst the multiple verticals that Tata Power domain has, energy and infrastructure is the vertical where we represent. So the renewable energy arm of the Tata Power's Tata Group company known as Tata Power Renewable Energy Company Limited. It was established in 1990. The only organization which has seen the even 100 years lifespan. We have very recently celebrated our 100 years journey. The company has a mission and vision to be to be a carbon neutral by 2045, and we as an organization are working towards that particular aim. Now talking about the multiple talking about the business model that we have. So typically thermal and hydro was one of our major business model where we as an organization started. Later on we have diversified into transmission and distribution network. As you can see in the map, which is on the left hand side of your screen, there is a transmission corridor which we have developed connecting Indo Bhutan energy transmission perspective. The length of this corridor is
Sorry to interrupt
3,530.
you, sir, but your
Yeah,
screen is not visible actually. If you
it
could
is
just
not
share your
visible.
screen.
I'll just stop this sharing and I'll reshare with you. Just a minute. Is it visible now?
No, sir, not yet.
Not yet. Just a minute.
Sir, just right next to the mic button, there's a share a present to audience option. If you could just click on that.
Just a minute. I'll do it right away. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir, now it is visible. You just have to play the presentation once.
Just a so
One
I'll
of
just come to the.
your Windows screen is visible with the folder data center, but the presentation as such is not visible. Your screen is visible, but the presentation is not.
Sorry for the glitch, guys. So now my presentation is visible.
Yes, yes, it's clearly visible.
Yeah, so the point I was talking about, the multiple verticals that we have, that we majorly run and operates in the Tata Power domain, is thermal, hydro and transmission division. Now one of the vertical which take care of renewable energy portfolio. So just to share you the number, we own and operate around 2600 megawatt worth solar asset, right. There's a 932 megawatt wind turbine that are currently been under operational by the company. Also talking about the manufacturing facility. So at current we have a 635 megawatt peak solar PV module manufacturing facility which is operational in Karnataka region. In fact, many of you might have read in the news article that we have very recently announced a new module manufacturing facility which will be manufacturing around 4 gigawatt worth solar PV module in India. The vertical where I represent, we called it new business services. Now this vertical has been specifically designed to cater the requirement of uh, no uh, commercial and industrial consumer. Now data center is again one of the it basically an industrial segment. Since data segment have the presence is in scattered manner, the requirements are little in detailed and depth manner, right. So in order to cater the solution that we required, we have formulated the new business vertical where we take care of multiple activities: EV charging, where it is solarizing the rooftop space which is available, group captive open access mechanism, which is open access as a mechanism. It has been principally old, but group captives, since government has started adopting the group captive mechanism, it has significantly pick up at least in the state of Maharashtra, Karnataka, and some of the north states. Talking about our presence, our cumulative capacity of the installation as on last FI was 1100 megawatt peak. Now, if you see the map, right, it basically we are there, present right from Jammu Kashmir to Tamil Nadu, and from Gujarat to probably the most eastern side Arunachal Pradesh. So everywhere we have set up on-site solar system. You can also see some of the maps where some of the icons where solar PV with the solar sign has been present. So these are the park where Tata Power is targeting to develop solar group captive open access project. uh, just to draw everyone's attention, on the left hand side of the screen, this is in fact still world's largest single rooftop project that we have executed for one of the education institute in Punjab. uh, uh, it basically, the record capacity is of 16 megawatt on a single rooftop the screen. Very recently, many of you might have seen the WPL, Women Premier League. So the final, which was held on the Bremont Cricket Stadium, this is the again the cricket stadium which has been solarized by Tata Power. uh, while discussing and while presenting, I have mentioned some of the aspect, right, on-site and off-site. So typically, anything which is within the premises, we call it on-site, and anything which is been set up at the neutral location and power is being sourced via using no existing infrastructure, transmission and distribution infrastructure, we call it off-site. Now, just to let you, just to focusing more on the off-site perspective. So we have clients like NetMagic, Seat Tires, Endurance Technologies, Tata Communications. These are some of the our key clients where we have actually developed group captive open access solution. And also some of the uh, right from auto ancillaries to chemical manufacturing companies, we have provided most of them uh, on-site system. So as I was mentioning, under the offsite system, so let's say data center, talking particularly about the data center has very heavy consumption appetite in terms of the electricity and the power requirement. Some of the data centers even they have some of the within premises campus space available. Now, depending upon the solution which is available, the space and area has been available, Tata Power can help you providing on-site solution as well, right? Whether it is your RCC roof, whether it is your car parking share, currently present car parking share, that also you can convert it into solar electricity manufacturing facility. And also similarly, if some of the data centers they do have open ground mounted space available, it is little difficult, at least not that I have seen, but uh, let's say some of the data center has open space which is within the premises that can also be utilized for the generation of electricity, right? uh, Now, offsite solar system. Now, under offsite system, what typically happens is a solar PV plant set up at a neutral location. If I have to take an example, let's say in Maharashtra, NetMagic had a data center which is there in Mumbai region. So for them, we have set up a plant in Solapur, which is around 250 kilometers apart. Set up the plant by using the discoms and transcoms, distribution company and transmission company, that existing infrastructure. Under the mechanism of open access, we have actually transmitted that power from that generation source to commercial source. So that has been under qualified as the open access off-site solutions. The arrangement which I was typically mentioning, the plants get set up at a neutral locations by using transmission network. It gets power gets wheeled to the discom, to your existing consumption location. Now, under this mechanism of open access, now why I'm specifically talking about open access, because in my experience I have seen data centers typically have multi-storage buildings or large campuses where their rooftop space might not be that significant. If they do have rooftop space available, that area has been either been utilized for the HVAC or for the AC's outduct or the chillers perspective. So many of the data center might not have some of the rooftop space available in the inside the premises. So for them, open access mechanism is something which can play a really huge role in their aim of becoming a carbon neutral. Now, under the open access mechanism, typically, there are two segments of captive open access and the third party open access. Now, what happens in the third party open access is end consumer doesn't invest anything. it's the developer. Let's say in our case, Tata Power will set up a plant at a neutral location, and will sign a power purchase bilateral power purchase agreement with an end consumer, and power will get transmitted with the similar mechanism, right? It's a commercial mode of operation. Power will get transmitted through that very same mechanism, and end consumer will pay for every unit that is being generated by Tata Power, right, without any investment. Now what we have seen in the no while reviewing the regulation, what we have seen, the moment some of this no end consumers started sourcing power under third party mechanism, we call it third party mechanism, right, where they do not invest. Under such transactions, government tends to apply some additional charges to an end consumer. What we have seen is that becomes sometimes that uh, if depending upon the respective discoms tariff order, electricity tariff, what we have seen is in Maharashtra at least, this mechanism is not been very commercially attractive, right, because of the additional charges which gets imposed on this third party type of open access transaction. Now the option which is available with an end consumer is setting up the captive open access plan, where end consumer, which is let any data center set up, it's 100% of the plan. The asset is get transferred in the name of end consumer, and it is being maintained and operated by that same end consumer, right, where but here the catch is end consumer have to pay 100% investment, right. Now if but there is a midway, considering the electricity definition of a captive consumer. If you understand it in the electricity act, the act says end consumer needs to have a 26% equity, and it needs to consume 51% at least electricity which is being generated from that solar generation facility. Now understanding this definition, there is this basically a deal breaker path which has been developed under the mechanism, and which is also been accepted by regulatory bodies. We call it open access mechanism. Now what happens in this mechanism, end consumer do not have to invest 100% money. They still get each and every benefit which are associated with the captive open access park, and they tends to pay only for whatever generation. So basically it is risk is being mitigated. Entire plant it is being maintained and operated by Tata Power for its entire duration, and even no end consumer needs to pay for whatever is being generated or whatever is being agreed, mutually agreed electricity units and the tariff. So that is the best part about this type of an arrangement. Now just to explain the similar mechanism, I have conducted a small comparison, right, where I have taken a typically industrial data centers example, right. What I have seen, I have basically compared captive and group captive as a mechanism. So typically what happens in this mechanism, so upfront payment, as I mentioned, in captive cases it needs to be paid by the end consumer, and here in group captive cases, end consumer needs to invest only 26% of the equity amount, right, which is typically 8.9% of the project value, that too refundable. Asset ownership, in captive case, yes, it is been with end consumer, whereas there is no asset ownership in the case of if the end consumer adopts for a group captive mechanism. Lock-in period, since it is a captive, there is no concept of a lock-in as such, right. As long as plant life is there, plant can generate, they can avail the electricity which is being generated. And under group captive mechanism, the agreement is generally in the span of 15, 20, 25 years. Larger the span of the agreement, no better the tariff and better the no savings that end consumer avails. Tax benefit, so once as a standard practice in the RE segment, end consumer, if he invests 100% money, he can claim the accelerated depreciation. Whereas in the group captive segment, the IPP, the developer gets the tax benefit, and as I mentioned, CSS and SS charges. Now what I've typically done, basically a similar arrangement in terms of the rupees per unit. So what I've seen, let's say I've taken a 12 megawatt solar AC system, right. Approximate investment would be somewhere around 77 crore rupees. Plant of life is 25 years, so estimated generation per year would be no 2 crore 75 lakh units per annum. And total span of in an entire span, it will generate somewhere around 64 crore units, right. So if I simply maths, if I simply divide cost of investment, right, versus the actual generation which has been availed, so the per unit tariff, right, considering the 25-year generation would comes around 4.4 rupees, right. In the case of where plant has been 100% set up by the an end consumer. Now I've taken the Maharashtra's example, right? So base tariff, let's say, is 4.49 rupees, and additional charges, which we call it open access charges, right? The net realization tariff would be somewhere around 5.52 rupees to 6 rupees, depending upon the exact asset value of that particular time duration, right? So whenever end consumer pays an 100% investment, their per unit tariff is boiled down to 5 to 6 rupees per unit, right? I'm talking about the captive, where 100% investment is being made by the end consumer. Now, considering the very same example, if I convert it into group captive perspective, now here a consumer, the per unit tariff boils down to, again, the very same mechanism. Here I've considered a lock-in period of 15 years, right? A very same example, the per unit cost for lock-in period of 15 years comes down to 3.78 rupees. Now, very same transmission charges and other charges get applicable, where it boils down to 4.82 rupees. Now, simply state away parallel comparison in captive, uh, it boils. So, why now there will be a question in your mind, right? Why the captive cost would be higher? Now, what happens typically in the case of captive, the land, again, it's an asset, right? So there is a recurring cost which land, since we lease out the land, right? There is a recurring cost which is get involved in this particular mechanism. Hence it becomes little commercially expensive, but again, the asset is with the end consumer, so that is the best part about the mechanism. Now, just to highlight data centers example, right? As I was mentioning, the Net Magic is the data center where we have executed the project. Now we have executed around 62.5 megawatt peak worth capacity for end consumer. They totally had six data centers in Mumbai, which is under Tata Power's Discom, and one of them was in a couple of them was in Adani's distribution network. So their total capacity for them we have provided is 62 megawatt peak, right? Uh, so 62 megawatt peak, 15 and 15 megawatt peak. There is again one manufacturing facility that they have in 15 megawatt peak in Tamil Nadu. So wind and solar is both combined can be, uh, was we have actually provided to this data center, right? The load profile. So sir, average per unit cost in their case was around their so their base load price, the type that they were paying to the discount, was around 12 to 10 to 12 rupees, which was boiled down to the 6 to 6 7 7.5 rupees in this particular case. uh, this is basically a case study that I had and which I wanted to share with you. Some of, in fact, so this is the very same solar park through which one of the segment we have given to this net magic as a data center, some of the glimpses of the site. Now this entire process is very smooth. Regulatory been it has been under adopted and accepted by regulatory mechanism. Right. Very simple actions. Very simple. There are three set of agreement which gets formed, and once the agreement is been formalized, open access power sourcing can be very easily started and adopted. And this is the reason why open access is catching the attraction, right, in Maharashtra and probably across the country, is because it allows you to set up the capacity up to your contract demand and sanction load, right? Right. So basically, irrespective whether you have enough rooftop space available, right? As long as your consumption appetite is there, right? There is a huge chunk of the portion that you can avail by considering either mix of wind solar or specifically solar, depending upon your consumption pattern. That entire study which can be conducted by our team, and we can straight away provide you a solution. That's it from my end. I hope I was yeah, perfect. I was able to, I think, complete in stipulated time frame. Any question that teams have, I'll be more than happy to address it even now, or probably during the second part where we are plan ourselves for a Q&A session.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. Um, if you, yes,
Thank you so
so
much.
that was really interesting to know. As we all are aware that data centers continue to play a critical role in modern society, so it's important to take steps to minimize their environmental impact. The upcoming panel discussion, which is the most awaited one, will also explore strategies for achieving net zero emissions in data centers, including energy efficiency, renewable energy, and carbon offsets. The upcoming panel discussion will also feature our session experts in the field who will share their experiences and insights, as well as case studies of data centers that have successfully transitioned to sustainable practices. Allow me to introduce the proficient panel for today. Mr. Amit Agarwal from WebWorks, who will also be our moderator, uh, Mr. Swapnil Joshi from Infosys Center of Excellence, Mr. Suresh Kumar Chandran from STD Telemedia, and Mr. Vikrant from Tata Power. Over to you, sir. Over to you, Mr. Amit Agarwal.
Thank you, Sakshi. And Vikrant, very informative presentation. I think you tried to include everything in a very short period of time. Thanks a lot. And it was very relevant from the data center overall industry perspective because you gave a very good case study also as to how you are bringing down the cost and what are the different models wherein people can save the overall cost. Just to build on that, I would like to have uh, one small question from you regarding what is the trend that you are seeing. Is it only the cost saving that a data center is interested in, or overall, there are certain benefits or there are certain areas where data centers are looking for net zero emission, and when we talk about environment, so how much these data centers are actually aware about this climatic change, net zero emission, and what are the different steps that data center industry as a whole is trying to take?
Well, Amitji, see, with my experience, what I've seen, right, perhaps it's basically a mix of both things, right? Yes, of course, saving cost in terms of the electricity is again one of the important aspect. But having said that, most of the data center I have interacted with, they already have taken no carbon neutral target for themselves. Some of them have taken science based target for themselves, and most of them aim to be a carbon neutral. No, most of them no to. They are basically targeting to be carbon zero over a certain period of time. So it is basically mix of both things. Now talking about the step that they have taken, right? Some of them, right? So open access. Now, if I talk specifically about Maharashtra as a state, right? In Maharashtra, the open access mechanism was pretty much there since 2015, right? But then again, there was a period where some of no there were there were certain hurdles, right, from the regulatory perspective, and the open access was not becoming that much commercially viable. Now in very recent time, uh, there is very clear guidelines in terms of the regulation, in terms of the open access adaptability, right? What typically happen in the case of data center, as I was mentioned in during my presentation, data centers have no multi-storage buildings, and comparatively smaller campus area, right? These are multi-storage high storage buildings. Now their energy consumption in terms of the area required is comparatively higher. So for them, rooftop was no like at maximum was they can set up no was somewhere around 600 1 megawatt perspective, but their energy consumption was again their base load consumption was in 12 megawatt, 6 megawatt, 16 megawatt as a base load consumption, right? So for them, open access somehow is basically meeting their overall power requirement. And that is why, since in Maharashtra, the moment regulatory clarity has occurred, most of them has started adopting group captive open access as a mechanism to fulfill their aim of becoming carbon neutral, no, as during their journey.
Great, great. Um, Swapnil, you have been leading the discussions, or you are leading the practice at uh, Infosys. So, and before, when we were having the discussion, you also brought upon a very interesting topic that we have to see the carbon neutrality, not only from the data center perspective, but also from the overall IT ecosystem perspective. Because, when we talk about zero emission, or when we talk net zero, um, apart from data center, apart from IT, there are other factors as well. which talk about the carbon emission and the carbon neutrality. So, what are the steps that, as an informed organization, Infosys, you are taking from the sustainability perspective?
Yeah. So again, to start with, Infosys is a carbon neutral organization, right? So the overall impact of Infosys operations on the environment is zero. There are also a whole bunch of social and governance aspects that we get into place. Uh, the way we've approached it, and this is primarily not only from an Infosys context, but also from a place where organizations really need to focus on their net zero journey, is is primarily looking at three steps, right? One is define what the net zero is, right? What is it that it essentially means to be net zero, whether it is net zero energy, whether it is net zero emissions, and what are the constituents of either net zero energy or net zero emissions. And when we talk about net zero emissions, we need to also be able to define that we are including embodied carbon and operational carbon, two very distinct aspects within the carbon accounting frameworks, right? Uh, there are other aspects where we also need to go out and incentivize net zero, and as Vikrant was saying, right, multiple opportunities exist there, and then take a whole carbon KPI driven life cycle approach, right? So when you're talking about a data center, the data center just does not mean a building, right? There are aspects where we need to really focus on the physical infrastructure, where we need to look at the way in which the data center is constructed, look at the design, to ensure that there are passive design considerations and interventions that happen to ensure that the overall energy intensity for the data center is minimal from an infrastructure perspective. We need to look at the way in which the data center is operated. We need to look at energy management aspects. We also need to look at carbon offset strategy and management, and then also top it up with certification and certain sustainability aspects, right? We have a whole bunch of certification agencies that are there in the country that actually define national imperatives that buildings like data centers can achieve if they get certified. The other aspects within the entire IT ecosystem, because data center constitutes is primarily all IT, is to take into account the computing framework. What are the computing devices that go in within a data center? We need to look at the storage aspects of data centers. So look at racks and the way the racks are structured, way they're, and then the network. So, and to tie all of this, for people to be able to actually look at a net zero uh, vision, there needs to be a cultural element as well. So five elements where we around data centers, where we talk about infrastructure, storage, network, computing, and culture are key, are key interventions that we need to do. We need to be mindful of the fact that global internet activities constitute as much as 3.7% of the global emissions. And this is equivalent to the emissions that the entire aviation industry has on the environment today. Roughly 40% of this comes from digital solutions, the applications and websites and chatbots and so on and so forth, which means that 60% of this emissions is attributed to data centers. And when we define what our data centers constitute, uh, when we say net zero emissions, we also need to look at the e-waste aspect of it, because the minute waste gets to landfills, it has a methane impact, and then ultimately, an overall impact on what the GHG emissions should look like. So the entire life cycle interventions with respect to energy, water, waste, the way the buildings are looked at should be the focus for organizations, in my viewpoint.
No, I think, Swapnil, very valid point. It's not only in terms of energy management that you're looking at, it is a complete life cycle approach. Thanks for bringing that point. And, for a typical data center, and sorry, as I also come from the similar industry, and we are also a very um, uh, responsible data center operator. The Iron Mountain data centers, we are globally, uh, we take care of uh, this thing from the life cycle approach only. Like all our data centers are ISO 50000 one certified, accredited for energy efficiency. We are also part of the uh, you know group companies with signed COP26. And in 2019, we reduced the greenhouse gas emission by 52%. And this initiative we took only in 2016. So in 3 years, we almost reduced the target that we had taken for 6 years. We reduced in 3 years, and this was only possible by dwelling on all the points that you mentioned, in terms of right from the design perspective to how do you uh, design your compute storage network perspective, and how do you take care of your e-waste. So we also, in fact, we went one step ahead, and we also invested into a company which is into asset lifecycle management. So not only we will be doing our e-waste policy, but we will also help the other customers also to effectively design their e-waste policy. uh, this brings to a very uh, uh, interesting discussion. And Suresh, I would like to know your views, because STT also has seen tremendous growth in last couple of years. You have announced a lot of data centers. uh, we've also heard about your efforts or initiatives on green energy, your initiatives on overall reducing the emission. And so, how are you doing things differently, or what are the things that you are working from the operations perspective?
Thank you, Amit. Thank you, Swapnil, for giving that five elements and as well as the brief detail about the entire thing. It is not only energy; it's a kind of culture as well as other parameters and aspects. Now, as far as STT GDCA is concerned, we are having around 21 operating data center pan India, and as well as if you see our consumption is also now almost around reached around 700 million units per year, out of which we have almost 36 percentage of RE contribution we have already reached. So compared to last year, there is a increase of around 33 percentage. So every year we are having a CAGR rate of power consumption increase of 18.3 percentage. In that, we are trying to sorry we are trying to cope up the increase in the consumption with the RE infusion as well as in the other parameters also. And as Vikrant told, to offset this carbon emissions or carbon consumption, those things, group captive, the captive is a major playing major part, because rooftop solar as well as the other way of other form of RE infusions and all, it's not addressing that maximum in terms of quantity as well as in terms of commercial, and as well as all the state regulatory aspects also, and as well as in our campus also, it is very difficult to have those kind of solar rooftop and all. Only option is at present we are having is captive. In that also we are group captive. We are also having a major contribution every year. We are floating RFPs, and recently we have signed one RFP with the O2 power, as all you are aware. And this way we are signing, and our present contribution is 36 percentage. We are taking RE power. In another 5 years down the line, we are planning for 800 million units of RE infusion with the current rate of increase in the consumption.
So that's very impressive, Suresh, and uh, the kind of uh, aspirations that you have or kind of targets that you have from the renewable energy sources is really commendable.
And
Um,
by FY 26, we are planning to have of 50 percentage, and as well as FY 30, we will achieve our carbon neutral for data center operation, entire thing.
Okay.
Just for,
So,
yeah.
Suresh, uh, the follow-up question on this, and I'll ask this question to you only. Uh, are you seeing that customers are also demanding their pie from uh, these particular initiatives that you are taking? So, are you also being asked from the customers that if you are using, let's say, green energy, or if you are using renewable energy sources, then you should also pass on the benefits to them from the carbon emission perspective?
Yes, yes, definitely. Because nowadays, each and every customers is having these obligations, emission related awareness, and each and every according to their geography, they are having all their obligations. So each and every customers, they are well aware, as well as they are asking about these RE benefits, RECs, this asking for the person. We are for each customers, we are having our agreements and tie up with that consumers, and we are passing the benefits. Yes.
Great, great. So, one question, Swapnil, from from this is, uh, what do you see? We saw that there are opportunities, there are ways and means to achieve this, but still we feel that there is only, let's say, when Suresh was talking today, they have 26%. They have aspiration of going 100% in next 2 to 3 years time frame from the renewable. So, what are the challenges which are you know uh, being faced by the organizations for achieving this, let's say, net zero emission, or take this uh, or the other complexities which are involved in getting there right now?
Yeah. So again, as I said, uh, while we talk about opportunities, there are also challenges, right? The overall sustainability definition today is emerging, right? And it is complex, and it is complex in a nature where organizations can, in a very easy manner, address their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, right? So when you look at the overall emission footprint, when we categorize it under the three scopes, scope 1 and scope 2 is easy to manage. However, scope 3 is difficult primarily because scope 3 is influenced by the entire uh, supply chain. As an example, when data centers have a vision of being carbon neutral, that means scope 3 emissions for the customer who uses this data center is zero. However, for this data center, their scope 3 will be dependent on the fact that Vikrant's scope 3 emissions are also zero because they're sourcing renewable power from Vikrant, right? So we will really need to have a very clear understanding on how the definition of these emission scopes play a role. That's one. Second is, uh, in the race to become net zero, most of the times there have been so we do not look at it from a holistic perspective. There have been so many instances where we've had people coming back saying cost is an issue with respect to creating a net zero environment, for that matter, and which is not correct, right? In fact, when we retrofitted a few of our internal data centers, we realized that we were 21% lower in terms of the money that we spent from the industry benchmark. Uh, and again, as I brought in elements where sustainability within the data center environment has to be top driven and culture has to be bottoms up, right? So till the time these few things are addressed, these will continue to pose challenges for us. However, uh, you know there are convergences that are happening, uh, and that's the silver lining to the cloud, if you will.
Right. So, Swapnil, there's a question from one of the attendees, and you though you touched upon some of the answer in the answer that you gave right now. The question was that is RE the only way to achieve net zero?
No, RE is one of the
I think
most
you touched upon this previously. But
yeah, no, right?
correct.
So again, as I said, right, it is very important to understand the overall net zero approach, right? Now, there are different constituents when you basically look at what net zero is, right? When you start looking constructing the data center, and I'm assuming that at this point in time we want to look at a new greenfield data center, we need to include aspects where we have passive design considerations when we are building the system. We need to put in active or efficient systems that consume low energy. We need to ensure that we focus on operations and that there is a proper demand management strategy in place. That's when, so these are the factors that basically look at energy reduction to start with from a data center perspective. Then comes on-site renewables or off-site renewables, depending on to make up for the remaining or for the balance of carbon offsets or carbon that you need to really offset. We then need to focus on supply and value chain interventions. A big aspect of being net zero, true net zero, is grid decarbonization, right? We need to decarbonize the entire grid. So entire electricity that flows on the grid needs to come from renewable energy sources. Now, again, that's one bigger aspect that needs to be looked at not only from a data center perspective, but from an overall built environment perspective. We need to bring in elements of circularity where we transform and reuse. We build less, we build, clever, we minimize waste, and we build efficient. Even after doing all of this, we will still have some amount of carbon that will be that will be there because if the business has to operate, there will be a carbon footprint, and this carbon footprint can then be offsetted using ethical carbon offset programs, which ties back into rural electrification programs, uh, afforestation, carbon capture solutions, and so on and so forth. So renewable energy is the easiest way uh, to ensure that the energy that comes to you is clean and green, but that's not the only way. There are multiple other interventions that you need to do. I mean, it is so easy to debate on this, right? I have, as an example, if I have a data center, uh, the size of the data center being about 1 megawatt, and I install a renewable energy plant which is 2 megawatt, then I am carbon neutral. But it does not bring in efficiencies, right? It is just pure math. Doesn't really fit the bill. At the organization that I work in, right, we have around 60 megawatt worth of solar that we've installed in our campuses, but we did it only after we ensured that we initiated a whole bunch of energy efficiency measures where we reduced our per capita energy consumption by close to 54%. Uh, you know, our our employee headcount grew 200%, while our absolute energy consumption just went 18%, right? And that was primarily because we were able to, bring in these efficiencies because we ran energy efficiency programs. And when we wanted to look at net zero aspect, that's where we went the renewable energy way, and then ran ethical carbon offset programs.
So, Swapnil, would you like to throw some light on this energy efficiency programs that you ran for your organization for the
Yeah.
benefit
So
of all the attendees?
yeah, so multiple interventions, right? So energy efficiency is also a function of the kind of operations you run, right? From a data center perspective, energy efficiency should be focused on uh, cooling loads, right? Because HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, is primarily the biggest energy guzzler there. Uh, a whole so we've looked from a data center perspective within our organization. We looked at around 40 different KPIs, and these KPIs spanned across 9 different categories of KPIs. So we looked at capacity KPIs, we looked at cost KPIs, we looked at asset KPIs, we looked at change management KPIs, space, we looked at power efficiency, we looked at cooling KPIs, we had connectivity KPIs, and then we essentially had a master list of all the energy efficiency measures that we would do, in a data center. Today we have data centers that run at a PUE of 1.12, and this data center is in Bangalore primarily because we were able to ensure that the data center ran on, uh, gave us data and information where we managed and met those 40 KPIs. There will be a whole bunch of so changing your conventional DX units to chill water based systems, right, is one very classic example of how you can reduce the overall cooling energy consumption within the data center. Moving to strategies such as radiant cooling is also something that we have done. So multiple interventions depending on what operations are. There are frameworks that are available that you can actually go back and look at and ensure that the data centers are energy efficient. We should not stop here, and I thought it was prudent for me to bring this here. The So it is all great when when we have these interventions around our transition to net zero. It is very important to also measure the impact of all of the activities that we do in our journey to be net zero. So, impact assessment is something that we need to also add in for the overall strategy and roadmap that we develop, either from a data center perspective or from the journey of being net zero.
Correct. No, I think very relevant point, Swapnil, because it has to be a programmatic approach. You need to be aware about what are your targets. Then you have to define the KPIs, and I think the most important part that you spoke about, that you have to do the impact assessment, um, in terms of how each and every KPI is impacting your final outcomes. Um, Vikrant, I would like to understand from you because you've been working with a lot of companies which have. You gave a very good case study of entity. We heard from Suresh in terms of what they are doing from the data center perspective. Iron Mountain from data center perspective is doing, which I spoke about, the 360-degree view that we're doing. But what are you observing from a captive data centers which are being run? Because that also constitutes a very big portion. And are you also seeing the similar kind of sensitivity from that segment? Large organizations operating their captive data centers and they're trying to do the similar things.
In fact, see, it remains same, right? The aim is to be carbon neutral, right? So I understand the captive data center. You mean the data center setting up their own solar PV system? They're investing 100% by their own. Is that what do you mean by the 100% captive data center, Abhijit?
So I was saying that from the organizations who run their own data centers. So for
Okay.
example, an organization running their own data center rather than likes of NetMagic or SCT or Iron Mountain. Uh, any organization who's running their own data center, like Swapnil gave example of Infosys, where apart from whatever they have invested into renewable energy, they've also set up the KPIs, which is bringing their PUE down to 1.12. And I think in a country like India, running a PUE of 1.12 is a great achievement. And I think Suresh, my counterpart, also would agree to it that 1.12 PU is very good. Uh, we strive for that, right? So, are we seeing the similar kind of sensitivity in the enterprise segments also who are running their own data centers?
So in fact, yes. So see, what happens for the data center is that cost of electricity is very high, right? Uh, in fact, some of the data center they even tends to have commercial tariff also for their no housing royal point. So for them, it has become very important to not only to control the cost of electricity, but also to reduce the carbon the emission perspective. So yes, to answer to your question, the data centers which are captively running, and they are developing their own facilities, enterprises data centers that we call them, right? They're also adopting very fast perspective. Some of them even started availing the hybrid solution, right? What I mean by hybrid is solar and wind combined together, so that they can see what happens. See, if you understand typically the generation pattern of the solar, it generates during the sunlight perspective, when the sunlight is available. And the wind turbines, which they tends to generate most of the electricity during the night time, right? So considering the exact combination of the which has been meeting and fulfilling their own 100% power requirement. So some of the data center, even they started adopting this hybrid solution, though, so that they can maximize their energy offset from the renewable energy power sourcing perspective. So yes, Amit.
Great, great, Vikrant. Thanks a lot. And as a follow-up question, Swapnil, these are the initiatives that you are taking uh, from your captive usage perspective, your systems perspective. In what are the things that you are doing? But when you do an outsourcing work, like for example, if you are using a hybrid cloud, and if you are putting some of your workloads on cloud, uh, the general public cloud services, in that scenario, how would you ensure that your KPIs are being met? Do you have some kind of a mechanism to evaluate the vendors also uh, from the overall KPI perspective?
Yeah, so there are two aspects to the question that you asked, and I'm trying to think of of the best way to answer this, right? So from a scope three emission perspective, we do have ways and means where uh, our vendors will report into their carbon footprint, and that is taken into account when we do calculations to be net zero. From a data center perspective, or for strategies where you consolidate all of your uh, IT applications onto a cloud, uh, a whole bunch of interventions with respect to green IT come into play. As an example, there are considerations with respect to the functional design in which products are built. There are interventions in with respect to how or which softwares should be used to code. There are interventions that we make with respect to the overall carbon footprint with respect to the number of applications that are running to run a particular program. There are interventions that we do where we look at the number of cores, the processing cores that are needed to run a particular application for a period of time, and these interventions essentially give you a number which has the lowest carbon footprint, right? So to answer to your question, moving from uh, on-prem servers to on-cloud servers definitely has a huge advantage, and we have a whole bunch of FinOps that takes into account what the actual financial metrics are, what the actual carbon footprint metrics are, and then there's also aspects around our vendors reporting their emissions for us to be able to mitigate them when we look at our scope 3 emissions.
Great, great. Um, Vikrant, I've always intrigued about one aspect, which is a regulatory aspect. Though you, in your presentation and overall uh, video that you showed, you little bit touched upon the regulatory framework, but sometimes from the data center industry or from the overall you know industry perspective, whenever we are talking about renewable energies, and taking the units from, or taking the electricity from renewable unit energy is concerned, there are always certain regulatory aspects which are uh, becomes the little uh, blocking factors, like you don't have the storage capacity allowed, you interstate transmission is not allowed, you pay a lot of wheeling charges, there are a lot of transmission losses, right? Which uh, you know looking into the capex which is involved in terms of setting up a plant is concerned, and you definitely touched upon certain aspects that even after factoring all those the losses and the wheeling charges, everything put together, then also there is a saving. But sometimes the maths doesn't work out if you have a bigger load, like what Suresh mentioned, 7 million units, or higher number of units. If the number of units are smaller for a typical facility, the maths doesn't add up to that. What is your take on it? And
Yeah.
what is government doing in terms of easing these regulatory aspects?
So two aspect to this question. Now, first of all, we will have to agree to the fact that this is a regulatory driven mechanism, right? Since we are using discoms or the government's infrastructure and mechanism, there are certain rules and regulations which is being implemented by discom, and we as an end consumer, if we are using the transmission and distribution or the wheeling network, we need to abide those no regulations which has been mentioned. Now, if we understand the technical part of it, so now yes, there is a regulation which has been enforced, right? Now let's talk about the Maharashtra for an example, right? Maharashtra has imposed the open access minimum eligibility criteria of 1 megawatt at this point of time, right? The MSCDCL, which is a discom. Now if you understand the technical part of it, right, if anything which is one lesser than 1 megawatt, right, if I need to evacuate the power even to the substation, that technically also has been little in considering the losses which are there, it eventually becomes commercially non viable also for the smaller capacity which has been less than 1 megawatt to transmit the power from generation neutral generation source to the end perspective. So yes, it is a regulatory driven mechanism, and as the regulations been adopted and implemented by the discom, we need to adhere to that perspective. uh, yes, there will be now, as one of the very important factor that you have brought to the during your questions, that there is a huge investment which is to be made upfront, right? One which has been incorporated. But here, no, group captive IC still see a no still see a midway to perspective, where the entire risk, no, predominantly risk which is being carried by the developer, right? Developer, while signing up an agreement, power purchase agreement with an end consumer, can form a mutually acceptable requirement which can be mutually accepted to both parties, which can cover this aspect of this thing. Second, the second, what government as a mechanism, putting it to make it easy. So very recently, Ministry of Parliament, Ministry of Energy, they have recently passed a regulation where they have talking about reducing this capacity to less than up to even 100 kilowatt peak plant will now be start permitting the open access grant if they want to source the power. Yes, it is been yet to be adopted by the respective discom, but there is a positive steps which has been started taking by the government, Ministry of Energy. Also, there is a they have already started and established a single window clearance. If you refer the POSCO's website, the green open access tool which has been implemented. Now government is aiming toward making it to be more easier from the application perspective. Currently what is happening in Maharashtra, you need to file a regulation at MSCDCL, you need to take a consent or NOC, multiple so while setting up the plant you need to take a CIGs, multiple level no regulatory clearance. Now if we typically review the regulation which is being passed by the ministry, it clearly talk about providing a single clear no single window clearance for the entire asset which has been now developing under the RE perspective. So yes, there are positive steps which has been taken by the MSCDCL, and it is just a matter of time that no, since the MSCDCL or even the entire discom across the country, they start implementing those no ministry guidelines which has been imposed by or basically cleared by the government.
Thank you, Vikrant. I think this gives a lot of hope for the new wave of data centers that is going to come, because as we all know, there will be a huge demand of edge data centers, and because of the 5G rollout in various parts of the countries, and Typically, these edge sites would be,
Amit, sorry to intervene. As far as you asked about that interstate, that as far as the regulation is concerned, now interstate is also permitted, and most of the players started doing interstate. Also, we are also now working on that interstate because of getting various solar wind hybrid, and our offset also more than 75 percentage. And in the same way, another aspect is some of the states there is no favorable policies to avail this RE power, but they are also came up with a green energy policy. Their own we can get from discom itself, so we can get the green energy, but it is a premium at a premium rate. But we can 100% we can avail wherever we cannot get the interstate power, those things and all, we can get the energy from the discom directly. So that also one aspect is there.
great. No, thanks a lot, Suresh, for clarifying on that, because this was a kind of a misconception that we carried, that interstate is not there. So thanks for clarifying that. And as a question, I was actually coming to you, Suresh, was apart from renewable energy, what tools are you using? Like Swapnil mentioned in terms of various KPIs. Today we see that a lot of data is getting generated. People are using artificial intelligence. They're using data mining to define what steps can be taken. Are you also utilizing any innovative works or innovative methodologies to be more efficient as far as power is concerned and your journey towards net zero?
Yes, as mentioned by Swapnil, the thing is PE 1.1 is a very great achievement. We are also targeting that. And apart from the renewable energy, PUE, improving the efficiency by targeting the PUE is the main aspect in that. So, as far as the data center is concerned, the chillers and HVAC, those things we are working on that. And every data center wise, we are having our own team. They are working on the efficiency of each and every equipments involved, and we are monitoring that. And even we are achieved on that, and the 25 percentage reduction in every year we are targeted in the GHG emission, as well as regarding the scope 2 emission and the scope 1 also. And those things and all, we are working as a team, and we are targeting and uh, doing these things. And PE also we are having the target, and reduction every last year compared to financial year 22, we have reduced by 0.23 percentage. And in carbon emission also, we are having that our targets. So this way we are having our own parameters in terms of scope 2 as well as scope 1. Our team is working on that. Yes.
Great, great. So I think great discussions, and thanks for sharing your pointers. I would like to ask one very specific question to each one of you. We can start with Vikrant. Vikrant, uh, where do we see apart from the traditional ways of industry working, what other things that you see that would be coming across as a innovation in the same segment?
Uh, so so not only from the industrial perspective, but I see BIPV technology, right? Data centers these days, most of the data centers has a glass as a body, right? BIPV is something which has been not been commercially well adopted to an end consumer, right? But the moment there is a requirement, I see BIPV model which has been predominantly started availing and more becoming commercially viable as a mechanism perspective, as a technology perspective, which signifies, which will significantly increase the adaptability perspective. So I still believe the BIPV model is likely to play a huge part, specifically in the data centers.
Great. Your thoughts, Swapnil, what innovation do you see uh, in the overall scheme of things coming across now?
Yeah, so again, right, depends on. I would want to bring in five elements again here, right? And just go back to see what the post-COVID scenario looks like, right? So post-COVID data centers that are kind of coming up are essentially more flexible and on the edge, right? But then these data centers are also zero trust data centers, right? What I mean to say, or what these zero trust architectures will be an increased use uh, of software which will prevent users and or devices from connecting to the network without permission. Uh, the concept of digital twins uh, will and we've looked at various ways and means where we've talked about digital twins in the data center environment. It'll help avoid a whole bunch of potential errors prior to the actual construction. uh, the adoption of sustainable practices will continue to grow, and a whole bunch of standardization in the data center industry is also one of the things that is quite prevalent here, right? So you have a data center for a particular megawatt worth of connected load, and these are just state of the art. uh, when it comes to bigger organization, consolidation of data centers that are scattered across is another thing that we are currently looking at, right? Of course there will be business continuity and disaster management policies that will play a role there, but consolidation would be the key from an energy efficiency perspective as well.
Thanks a lot, Swapnil. Suresh, your thoughts on various innovative things that we are seeing or we are observing, which could again augment our overall net zero energy roadmap.
So achieving a net zero roadmap, presently we discussed about RE, PE, and another other efficiency methods, and we can achieve by the REC certificates also. And Rex is a major part, and wherever we cannot replace or compensate this consumption, we can do that. And as well as the in scope 1 emissions also, scope 1 and scope 3, because upstream and downstream also we can concentrate, and as well as because for me it is a scope 1, some other it will be a scope 3, like that. Those things we can concentrate. These are all the things we can do. As well as this state of the art, we can improve in the construction, as well as whatever the 5 points mentioned by Swapnil, in terms of building construction, in terms of standard quality of equipments, maintaining operation. Those things also we can. It is not a separate parameter. It is a combination of thing. It's a culture. That way we can do. We can achieve.
No, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Suresh. And you really summed it up very well by saying that it is not an initiative, it's a culture that you have to develop. Um, I would like to just contribute 2 points which I have observed as within the industry. So, from the data center industry perspective, uh, we are also looking at different ways. And as Swapnil touched upon a point that you have to look at your computing storage needs. So there's a whole lot of discussions which is happening on immersive cooling or liquid cooling or immersive cooling. So those are the things that we are taking initiatives, and we are also educating customers, because as rightly said, scope 1, scope 2 is okay, but scope 3 also should be there, and we should also educate our customers in terms of their adoption of compute should be such that we should be augmenting their efforts also from the energy perspective. Second, I came across a very interesting discussion with one of the larger organization, and I can't name the organization right now, but in their vendor selection policy, they came up with a unique thing that each vendor has to also uh, give details about the carbon emissions that they are uh, having. So if they have to select a vendor, not only cost, not only the credentials, but also their carbon emission details would be there. And now buyer has an option of actually looking at, that sustainable. If they are very interested about sustainability, they would look at that sustainability number, and then they can go with not only the L1, but they can go for a person who gives a holistic approach towards net zero carbon emissions, and also the overall culture about the green energy. So that was something that I found very interesting, and I think a lot of organizations going forward will have this adoption being done. And from the data center perspective, I think that will become a very important criteria from the selection of uh, when enterprise customers are selecting the data centers. They would also look at the carbon emission of each and every data center. So, so that's my observation. And gentlemen, thanks a lot. I know some of my questions were very open-ended questions, but you comprehended it very well. And you know, each one of you has practical experience in terms of dealing with uh, this net zero roadmap for your respective organizations. And Vikrant, you are doing for multiple of the customers, and the sharing was really very helpful. And I'm sure our uh, people who have joined the call also would have gained a lot from your experience and the discussion. Over to you, Sakshi. Over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a wonderful session. We also, since we missed one of our speakers today, Mr. Rao Srinivasa from Colliers, India, we have him as an attendee, and we are just planning to pass the mic to him so that he can give us the concluding remarks. Uh, Allow me a moment for that. Meanwhile, I'm just screening a few questions here. If one of you can answer this, whoever you think is the relevant person, Mr. Agarwal can guide that person.
So I've just texted Nasimji, Vikrant here. I've just texted Nasimji. So see, group captive is a subset of captive, right? It's just a commercial arrangement which differentiate both. But again, they both are technically same from the regulation perspective.
Mr. Agarwal, who do you think is the relevant person to answer this?
So KPI, I think I'll uh, request if Swapnil can answer on the KPIs, because he explained very effectively as far as the overall organizational KPIs. Uh, but within the data center, either Swapnil or um, Suresh, if you want to take up this question.
Yeah, I can take that up, and I would want Ravindra to actually also elaborate a little bit on. Do you want to know the exact nature of KPIs, or do you want to know the categories of KPIs? So, as I mentioned earlier, right, we have. I mean, from a data center perspective, there are about 40 different KPIs that span across 9 categories that we can develop for a data center, right? And within each of these KPIs, there will be a subset KPI that will be relevant, that will focus on equipment. As an example, when we are focusing on cooling KPIs, for example, right? There will be a set of cooling KPIs for the entire data center, but then there will also be a set of KPIs for the chiller plants, for the cooling towers, for the condensers, for the pumps, and so on and so forth. But from an overall efficiency perspective, but from an overall KPI perspective, I think 40 KPIs across nine different categories is something that is widely accepted today. Capacity, cost, uh, asset, space, uh, power, and then you have PUEs and DCIE and so on and so forth. Uh, Overall efficiency, so system efficiency, cooling efficiency, connectivity KPIs also are important from a data center perspective. All of this have a role to play in the overall net zero journey for a data center.
Thanks, Swapnil.
ಇದು ಎಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಗಾಡಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಹಾಕಿದ್ದೀರಾ ಈಗ?
So I'll take this, Amitji. So renewable energy certificate. See, it's a certificate which has been no Ministry of so MNRE basically issues this certificates. So for every 1,000 units which has been developed by the RE source, so government, the ministry MNRE allots them a particular RE, one REC as a certificate. So now in order to avail these certificates, one needs to register themselves into respective development agency. There is a process in order to avail this certificate from a generation perspective, generator perspective. These certificates usually get traded in the exchange, IEX and PXL. And if one needs to participate in the regular trading session which occurs every month and on Wednesday, and to source this certificate via close end bidding which happens. So renewable energy certificate is the certificate which has been allotted for the end generator, for the generator for developing every 1,000 units of an electricity.
So taking up that particular thing, thanks, Vikrant. Just adding on to that, the data centers also, today provide that green pass. So as a policy outside India, Iron Mountain has also started a practice that whenever we are utilizing the green power and customers ask for it, we give the green pass to the customer where they can also take the carbon credit and they can also trade it in the similar way that you mentioned. So we also pass on that benefit, and I think that would be the way that the data center industry would be going in a future direction, and the same will be available to the customers as well. Very interesting question, and I think uh, you know Vikrant, you should be taking this question that why we are talking about net zero, why are we not talking about carbon positivity?
I mean, so I think as long as intent is clear to be to reduce our carbon footprint, right? Uh, so I'm actually not been well versed with the carbon positivity perspective, but as long as the aim and intent is to be carbon neutral and to reduce our carbon footprints, I think it doesn't matter what we should aim for it. But then again, we should always try to reduce carbon footprint by any which is mechanism which has been adopted. I'm not sure, Murgesh, I was able to address this perspective because I'm not that familiar with the carbon positive perspective as a concept perspective. But then, yes, I'll still will say the fact that as long as aim is clear, whatever mechanism we need to adopt it, whether it is science based, carbon neutral, RE0, RE100, everything should fall in place.
Swapnil, anything, any input from your side?
Yeah, I mean, being carbon positive is always a great aspiration. Uh, and when we discuss this internally, I always go back and say, if you are carbon positive, then we'll be able to put enough pressure to create diamonds out of carbon, right? Because when you put a lot of pressure on carbon, that's where you get diamonds. But there have been cases where we've had technologies that we've implemented where the overall carbon sequestration is more than our carbon footprint, right? And these are really great aspirations to have. I think uh, the first and foremost call for action is to become carbon neutral, should be net zero by 2050 and 2070 from a country perspective, and then look at ways and means to be carbon positive, because that's what we owe it to our posterity, right? We owe it to our children, we owe it to our next generation. So yeah, this is an aspirational thing and we should look at it. Again, multiple ways. There is enough information and formulas that are available to kind of determine Ujwal what PUE is and what IT power consumption effectivenesses are. In fact, if you go back and look at the data center guidebook uh, that IGBC has published, right? It'll have a whole bunch of uh, resources that will direct you to the answers to these questions. So I don't think we want to get into the mathematical calculations for PUE and IT power consumption effectiveness at this point in time. So Ananya, I don't really understand, the question. What are the measures to get the best PUE as prospective for renewable energy? Uh, Again, right?
Both actually they both are different thing. PUE is the efficiency as well as the whatever the what in what way we are operating the data center, whereas the renewable energy is what the consumption out of which it's coming out. We are catering those things only. Correct, Sunil? This is
Yeah,
the my
yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
I believe with this we have come to the end of our panel discussion. It was an exhilarating session to say the least. And I want to thank our esteemed speakers for this wonderful session. And a very special thanks to our moderator for superbly managing the session. A big shout out to our attendees for extending their time and support for the event. And not to forget mentioning our partner Tata Power for extending their immense support to organize this event. We promise to come back with more exciting sessions soon. The floor is now open for networking. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you,
Thank you.
Sakshi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Suresh. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Amit.
Swapnil.
Thank you,
Thank
Swapnil.
you, Vikram.
Thank you.
Nice interacting with you.